Welcome to another episode of Leading with Empathy. Today, I'm talking about a topic I'm really passionate about, which is how do we make strategic decisions with empathy? See, so often I work with leaders and they think empathy is this nice thing you sprinkle on top, and you don't really use it in the more strategic ways that we expect in organizations. And I want to challenge that. I want to show you some examples today of why we need strategic empathy in our decision making so much more today than ever before, really. We'll start with a pretty simple idea. We have AI, we have technology, we have all these things that are helping us make decisions. But which decisions can't they help us with? Let me give you a scenario here. I want you to imagine you're in the Tesla Autonomous Testing Center. Very hard to say. Tesla Autonomous Testing Center. And in this scenario, you're standing at a control panel. You're testing these vehicles, and one of the vehicles is going down the runway quite quickly, very quickly. And on the dashboard, you realize something's gone horribly wrong. This car is out of control, it's malfunctioned, and it is speeding towards some of your peers, your colleagues in your workplace. They've got headphones on, they can't hear you, they can't be warned. It will slam into them and kill them all. The only thing you can do is press a button on the control panel. If you press this button, it'll make your the vehicle, spear hard left, and it'll run into one worker who's standing there by themselves. So you either press the button and one person will die and the four will be saved, or you do nothing and the four will be killed. Which one do you press? Now, this is an old problem. You might recognize it. Those who've done any sort of philosophy, this is a reimagining of the trolley problem, isn't it? And this is a tough thing to answer. Do you press the button or not press the button? You've got a split second to make a decision. And either way, there are terrible consequences. Now, let's imagine it isn't one worker standing over there to the left. Instead, when you press the button, you'll kill the Prime Minister of Australia. Now, some of you might be thinking, can I press the button twice? This is depending on your political preferences. That's completely up to you. But does that change the game? Do you think, well, hang on, does that person have different authority or different levels of responsibility? Is it different to press the button now than it did just moments before? And certainly in some cultures, that would be seen to be the case. What if instead of it being a co-worker or the prime minister, it was just a little kid, small child sitting there by themselves? What if it was your child? Now, these scenarios get incredibly difficult, don't they? Now, emotions start to race in. Feelings of compassion towards this young child. This child hasn't had a life yet. These other four workers, how old are they? Maybe they've lived a good life and we don't need to worry about them. What if in the final scenario, this time the only way you can stop that car from hitting the four workers is to physically push someone who's in front of you? They're across the other side of the control panel. You can give them a little shove, and if they fall, they'll fall in front of the car. The car will stop. It'll definitely kill them. Now, do you push or not push? And what we know from the research is the level of people pushing in the first scenario versus scenario four drops from about 60 to 70% down to more like 20 and 30%. The physical act of pushing is different, isn't it? Even though the outcomes are the same. Actually, if we look at these four scenarios and I was to ask you which one you pressed to push in and which one not, maybe put it in the chat below. Where did you decide to push or not push? These are very difficult decisions. Now, what's fascinating about this in particular is if you ask ChatGPT, it says, I can't answer that. I don't know. There is no good answer to this question. Should you push or not push? There isn't a good, logical, rational, simple answer. There's no one single way to go forward. Some people would say solving the problem is about maximizing the number of people you'll save. So in scenario four, you'd have to physically push the person. Some people would say, well, it depends on the individual people. But it also, therefore, depends on the perspective taken to look at those four individual people. Because if the little child was baby Hitler versus your child, then maybe the answer should be very different. And this is a really important thing for us to realize when we're making decisions, that the impacts of things like empathy and ethics should absolutely play a key role in decision making, shouldn't they? We know that not everything is logic and rational. And we know that when we're making decisions, empathy and ethics are critical in making good decisions. Yet, we don't really have a well defined understanding of what those things mean when it comes to putting them into devices like ChatGPT or other computational machines. So, this is where humans have to really understand what empathy means. Empathy is about understanding the impact of our consequences on those people who will be impacted. And we have to make judgments around whether this is a good or bad outcome. Now, in this case, there probably isn't a good outcome, and it's a good illustration. So let me give you an example that's a bit more real, a bit more straightforward in terms of its applicability, and one that comes from a real case study that we've done in the past. We want to look at strategic empathy through this lens of making a tough decision. So here's the scenario we're going to play with. You run a credit card business. We'll call it ABC credit cards for one of our big banks. Okay, ABC credit cards, they have credit cards, obviously, and other banking products that they have out in the marketplace. Now, as you'll know, if you have a credit card, you generally use it. Some people don't use it. And the banks will find that out. They'll say, well, this person's not making any transactions. I wonder what's going on. Now, there's generally two reasons why someone won't use a credit card. The first reason is they've got it as a backup. It's a safety net. It's something they put in a drawer somewhere, nice and safe, so that if anything goes wrong, they've got it there ready to go. Access to cash. Beautiful. Now, for those people, you should absolutely charge them the annual fee if that's applicable and keep the card open. The other reason, though, that people sometimes don't use their credit card is because they've lost it or forgotten about it. Now, in this scenario, you have to be much more careful because keeping the card open and charging them a fee is essentially fee for no service. You're breaking the rules of the obligation you have or the commitment you have with the customer. And so you shouldn't charge the annual fee on the card and keep it open. You should close the card. From a bank's perspective, though, you don't know which of these two scenarios is at play. So what do you do? What the bank was doing was sending out letters in the post to our customers saying, dear Mr. Smith, might be, we notice you're not using a credit card. We assume you might have lost it. So if you want to keep the card open, just let us know and we'll keep it open. If not, we're going to close the card so we don't charge you any more money. They were sending these letters out to their customers. Everything was working just fine until there was a natural disaster. There was severe flooding through much of the region, and one of your staff come into the office one day and say, look, with all this flooding, we can't keep doing what we've been doing. We'll call them Sam. Sam comes in and to the team meeting and says, look, we should stop sending letters. People have got post boxes underwater. They're not going to get the letters. What we should do instead is identify all those customers and phone them. We'll get their details, we'll give them a call, we'll check in with them, make sure they're okay, see if we can help them in other ways. This idea gets floated around the table. Now let's suggest that you're in that meeting and you're responsible for this. What would your response be? Take a minute, just have a think about what might your response be to this sort of question. So what did you decide to do? Should we stop sending letters and start making phone calls? What do you think? We actually put this scenario to about 3,500 people who worked for one of these big banks and who were very familiar with this process. We gave them three simple options. We said one option is you could stop sending letters and make phone calls to everyone. The second option we gave them was that they could just keep the cards open, don't bother sending letters anymore, just keep the cards open, and hopefully the regulator won't be upset that they're leaving the cards open and charging fees when these people might have lost their cards. And the third option was to just stick with the process. Don't change anything. They'll probably get the letters, they'll go to the post box, whatever. Now, what we saw in the discussions when we ran with these groups is that about 95% of the groups chose option A, to stop sending letters and to make phone calls. Now, you might be surprised by this if you have this interpretation that banks are money hungry, greedy, because the conversations they had were, look, I know it's going to cost more. I know it's going to be harder to do, but it's the right thing to do for our customers. We put our customers first. We want to look after them. We should make the phone calls. Now, what's interesting when we start to unpack this with empathy is that the goals or the situation might start to change a little bit pretty quickly. So the tool we're going to be using here is a perspective taking tool. How do I get different perspectives from different angles of people who might interpret this decision and the way this decision might impact upon them? Let's first take our customer's perspective. Very important, is what the most of these people had at the forefront of their decision-making process. From a customer perspective, let's imagine we are one of those people whose houses have been flooded, inundated. We're not sure where we're going to live. We're trying to deal with insurance companies. We might have lost lots of our property. Our loved ones might have been in danger. Pets. It could have been extremely bad. I'm in this situation as that customer trying to deal with everything around me. Next minute, my phone rings. It's a number I don't recognize. Will I answer it? Now, this creates a bit of a challenge for the bank, because if I don't answer it, what do? Do they keep calling and calling? Remember, they're not sending me a letter anymore. How many times do they call before they just cancel the card and move on? Now, that can be a bit of a challenge. They've got to keep records of how do we make all these phone calls. We've got to have some infrastructure to make sure we've got the right details. There's a whole lot of work that goes into just making sure that phone call is made and answered. Okay, we get through that hurdle. I answer the call. Hello. Hi, Mr. Smith. It's Daniel from the bank. Can I just get... now, this is a really important point to remember. The first thing banks need to do when they call you is identify who you are, don't they? So I finally get through. They answer the call. They get on the call. Hi, yes, Mr. Smith, it's Daniel from the bank. Before we start, can you just give me your full name, date of birth, address, mother's maiden name? You can imagine that a customer in this state of distress and distraught, a phone call out of the blue, someone saying that they're from the bank, the back of my mind knowing that scams are on the rise and there's all these sorts of people trying to steal my identity. Will I even give them those details? Will I tell them all of these things out of the blue? You call me. What do I need to tell you who I am for? Next, let's say we get through that hurdle. What's the number one thing on this customer's mind right now? Is it a credit card that they may or may not be using, that may or may not be important to them right now? Is it maybe more important to them their insurance, their home loan, these other big decisions that they're trying to grapple with? And from the credit cards division, can your people deal with any of those other problems? There is a scenario here where we get through all of these hurdles and still we actually give the customer almost no support. Is that really customer centric? Let's look at it from another perspective now. Let's take the perspective of your people, your employees. Now, I'm going to have a big guess here that none of them were sitting around twiddling their thumbs wondering what they were going to do before we asked them to make these many phone calls on top of their extra work. Again, we need a good process to help them track and keep identify who they've called, who they haven't called, who's answered, who hasn't answered, what did their response look like. We need to have a script for how to have a conversation with this person. We need to expect that a lot of the customers might be pretty upset with having to give all their details to someone to talk about their credit card. We might even have to expect that many of the customers they'll talk to will be feeling a level of trauma, and that our people won't be able to deal with that effectively without significant training and skills in dealing with traumatic conversations. What's worse is that some of our people will take that trauma on. And my question would be, do we have the ability and the skills to manage that ourselves? It gets trickier, doesn't it? What if I look at a social perspective? How might this play out in the world of media and social media? Did you imagine the headline? Bank flogging credit cards to vulnerable customers after floods? Now, we talked about this with the groups, and they said, well, look, that's clearly not our intent. That's fine. Unfortunately, a lot of these newspapers don't care about your intent. When we look at this from the different angles, you can see that this might blow up pretty quickly. Regulators getting upset that you're calling customers. The newspapers going to town with all these different things that you've put onto people, the questions you're asking. While your intent is good, it doesn't mean it's the right decision. And at the end of the day, having these different perspectives gives us a much, much richer understanding of what could be the outcome of the decisions we make. When we come to making more empathic decisions, it's not about just being nice to people. A quick decision here would have been just make the phone calls. But a truly ethical and empathic decision asks questions. It considers what will be the ramifications and implications on those different customers we're here to impact. And this is why empathy is critical in that process. This is not about sugarcoating with niceness. This is about understanding really how we impact those around us and making decisions that are far more strategic with empathy and ethics at the forefront. Now, as I mentioned, this is much more important now than ever before because we outsource lots of decisions to algorithms and machines today. And that is only going to increase exponentially. So we need to be very careful that if we're outsourcing decisions to these algorithms, that those ethical and empathic considerations are built in to that decision-making algorithm. Because if they're not, we'll often get very logical, rational answers that will have devastating consequences on those around us. Hope this has helped. I'd love your comments on where you've seen strategic empathy used or misused. And we hope you come and join us for the next episode of Leading with Empathy. Until then, take care.